Welcome to Books in Five, where we interview the authors of recently published books on relevant topics. We'll be asking the author 5 questions, and they will have 5 minutes to answer each one. I'm very excited about my guest today, as he has written an excellent new book about the need to address misinformation in the health and wellness space. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today. Please tell us your full name, the title of your book, and a little bit more about your background.
Pavan, thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. I love what you're doing with this podcast. My name is Jonathan Stea. I'm a clinical psychologist. My book is called Mind the Science, Saving Your Mental Health in the Wellness Industry. By day, I work as a full-time clinician in a hospital setting, helping people who experience severe addiction and mental disorders. And then I'm moonlighting, doing science communication work, such as writing this book.
Jonathan, let's begin with our first question. The health and wellness industry has exploded in popularity in the 21st century, but it is riddled with pseudoscience. Can you sketch out the factors for why so many people are susceptible to this bullshit in the present?
There's a variety of interacting factors or reasons that put people at risk or make them susceptible to bullshit, or more formally, misinformation, or some people have used the term disinformation, which is kind of like propaganda, spreading health-related lies. And to help me best understand it, I like to think of it as happening at different kind of layers or levels of analysis. So the first level of analysis is just happening within us, the individual level of analysis. So there's a variety of things happening within us, within our brains, that leave us susceptible to misinformation. One of which is just things called cognitive factors. So just the way our brains kind of tick. There's a idea called motivated reasoning. And this is one reason that puts us at risk for misinformation. And what motivated reasoning is it's essentially viewing information through a biased lens. We all have these biased lenses, and the lenses that are biased are filtered with our own personal beliefs, our experiences, our values, and those things filter how we see and interpret information. You can think of, the same objective news article, say, being read very differently by Republicans versus Democrats, or liberals versus conservatives. It's just the same piece, but all of our kind of background perceptions filter that. So that's one factor that leaves us susceptible to misinformation, is that we're not objective robots. We don't just get information and then interpret it. We have this background. So that's happening. There's also thinking styles that we all have. One, to make it in short, one set of these thinking styles happens at the level of very effortless, intuitive kind of gut instincts. So we process information really quickly, we see a piece and that makes sense and we kind of go for it. There's another kind of way in which we think, which is more of an analytical, slow, deliberate, effortful kind of thinking. And we have a body of research that shows when we're able to access that style of thinking, then we're less likely to be susceptible to misinformation. So that stuff's happening at the cognitive level. We also have personality traits that leave us susceptible to misinformation. Some people score higher on a trait called conspiracy mentality. It just means they're more likely to fall for conspiracies. There's other personality traits like openness to experience, which is basically just being very open to broad, kind of out there ideas. There's another personality trait, which is narcissism, which has been associated with falling for conspiracies. It's not any one of these personality traits or cognitive factors that leave us at risk. It's the interaction of these things that kind of leaves us in a perfect storm, so to speak. So that's all at the individual level. Then we also have the social level, such as social media. We're all targeted by misinformation on social media in a number of ways. Number one is by virtue of the algorithms. Algorithms are set up to make news headlines go viral that are very emotion laden, hyped up, overgeneralized, very opposite of what science does, which is very tentative and nuanced. And so that's one way in which we're targeted for misinformation. Also, there's bad actors at play. There's Instagram influencers, there's grifters, so to speak, who are selling us products and services. They're targeting us. And then there's even larger scale organizations like the Children's Health Defense, which is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s anti-vaccine vehicle that is very well funded. And they have social media pages and they target people with misinformation. So again, we have the individual level and the social level. All of these things interact, and that gives us a really complex but an identifiable psychology for why people are susceptible to misinformation.
Jonathan, let's move on to our second question. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the reality of alternative medicine. What are these treatments and who is peddling them?
It's innumerable. There's so many alternative medicine treatments that it's hard to kind of keep track. There's various categories of them, like naturopathy or energy healing. Homeopathy is another one. But I think a really important point that I want to drive home, that I make the argument in the book, is that alternative medicine isn't merely just a set of these unsupported treatments or these pseudoscientific treatments. It's much more than that. It's an entire ideology. And what I mean by that is that alternative medicine really serves as a foil to modern medicine and to mainstream medicine at large. And by an ideology, I mean that it has its own tropes, which are kind of repeated themes or ideas that we see in pop culture or on alternative medicine clinic websites, say. It has its own fallacies to kind of cajole and dupe audiences. And it really depends on this narrative to not only sell its own products and services, but to sow distrust in mainstream medicine. And this really has a long history. It's over 100 years old in the wellness industry, where alternative medicine was being used in this way. The term alternative medicine wasn't used until the 1970s, but that's essentially what it's doing. It's an ideology that people buy into that is very at odds with mainstream medicine. And unfortunately, the vast majority of these treatments are largely untested for safety and effectiveness, and they could be quite harmful. And that's a very terrible thing. We want to be able to help people understand that and protect people from that. In terms of the particular treatment, it just so happens that if we have a particular treatment that gets enough evidence under its belt, enough scientific research, then it can cross that somewhat arbitrary threshold into evidence-based practice. So it's really more about that ideology and that narrative that is so harmful, rather than the particular treatments per se.
We have about 2 more minutes for this question, Jonathan. And the second part of it was, who is peddling them? Can you talk a little bit more about the psychological factor of the people wanting to, recruit others into this alternative medicine? Are they in it for the money? Do they genuinely believe in the medicine that they're trying to get across?
I think there can be a lot of different motivations for who and why people are peddling them. I like to think that the vast majority of the people selling alternative medicine are actually really caring people, and they do want to help and they do want to make a living doing so. The problem is that even good intentions, even if people think they're doing the wrong thing, that doesn't justify the spread of pseudoscientific treatments that could be harmful. And I think there's a whole host of people who are peddling this stuff. A number of them could be not what we call a non-legally protected title. So they can be wellness consultants or wellness coaches, or depending on particular countries and jurisdictions, there's titles like therapists or counselors or practitioners that you don't need a license to call yourself that. Anyone can open an Instagram page or hang a shingle and say they're a therapist, depending on particular countries and jurisdictions. So what that means is that these people don't have credentials and qualifications to be able to offer health services for mental health or cancer or whatever it might be. Then I think it gets even worse than that, because there are people with bona fide credentials. They could have a PhD or an MD, which is a medical doctor, and still be buying into this alternative medicine ideology and still peddling dangerous alternative medicine treatments, which in some ways makes them a bit more dangerous because it lends a veneer of credibility.
Let's transition to our fourth question. You dedicate a significant part of your book to showcasing the importance of becoming literate in mental health and understanding psychopathology. Talk about why you were motivated to write about these critical topics and what should the reader take away from them.
It's crucial to improve our collective science literacy skills and our mental health literacy skills. When we look to the body of research that we have on science literacy and mental health literacy, unfortunately, it does not paint a good picture because poor science literacy and poor mental health literacy happens to be a major problem. What I mean by that is that there's a lot of people, unfortunately, in the general public that don't understand the nature of science and what statistical concepts mean and how to, what comprises a scientific study. And same with mental health literacy. There's not a lot of people that understand the nature of mental disorders and how to best treat them. And when that happens, it puts people at risk for falling for misinformation. And we actually have studies that show that people who have poor mental health literacy actually don't tend to do very well. They actually report more mental health symptoms like depressive symptoms and anxiety symptoms and stress and even internalized stigma toward themselves. And those folks are less likely to actually seek mental health services. So it's such an important thing to increase science literacy skills and mental health literacy skills, not only because it makes people more well versed in order to know how to access appropriate care, but it can also help protect them against the grifters, so to speak, or pseudoscience promoters. Again, whether they're doing that out of good intentions or not, it still helps to ultimately protect their mental health and their health more generally.
And the chapter you have about psychopathology, I really enjoyed that because it got into the history of that topic. Can you let us know about, the century plus that you write about psychopathology?
A really important point to understand is that the science of psychopathology is an evolving science, just like all areas of science. We're constantly learning about the nature of mental disorders and their treatments, and that process evolves over time. I really wrote that chapter too because I wanted people to understand that's what's happening. People devote their entire careers, and there's countless researchers and countless scientists over decades that have been trying to help people solve mental health and mental illness, and that's going to continue. There's a parallel process that's been happening, though, which is sort of the rise of the anti-psychiatry movement. And I really wanted to highlight that in the book because what the anti-psychiatry movement does is, again, it kind of serves as a foil to mainstream medicine. And it essentially spreads propaganda about mental health and mental illness. For example, denying that mental illness even exists, saying things like schizophrenia doesn't exist or ADHD doesn't exist, saying that all psychiatric medications or approaches are more harmful than helpful. And this kind of propaganda is very dangerous because it can ultimately deter treatment seeking and compromise patient care. So that chapter is really meant, again, to try to help people increase their mental health literacy skills by understanding a bit more about the process, about how we acquire information to inform our science of psychopathology.
Jonathan, we have about 90 more seconds. Let's talk a little bit maybe about the future. Are you concerned about the rise of AI and its effect on science literacy?
I'm very concerned about the rise of AI, although maybe more generally social media and its effect on our mental health literacy and our science literacy, because I think it's making our collective literacy skills worse. We actually have data and science to support this. We know that false information on social media travels further, faster, and deeper than truthful information. There were studies, one of which I took part in, which showed that the vast majority of videos about mental health on TikTok, which is a platform, many of these videos that offer information and advice are misleading. And it's not just that these videos are misleading, but it's the reach in which they reach. And so, for example, some of these videos are viewed millions and literally billions of times. So that shows the pervasiveness of this stuff. And there's a psychological phenomenon called the illusory truth effect, which just means the more times that we see and we hear misinformation, the more likely it is we are to believe that misinformation because our brains aren't very good at differentiating the truth from familiarity.
Let's move on to our fourth question. You have provided a helpful guide to root out junk science and scams with your 9 red flags. Walk us through some of this catalog and how it can be utilized to save us from the nonsense that is out there.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I think those 9 red flags are super important. I want people to memorize them if they can, have stickies on their fridges with them, because in part, I think that knowing these 9 red flags can really help to strengthen our grift detectors, so to speak. And so, yeah, I don't obviously have time to go through all of them, but maybe I'll highlight 3 pretty briefly. So one is a kind of what we call elevation of anecdotal evidence. So what that means is just elevating anecdotal evidence to support one's claims. You can see this via testimonials on websites. So if you go to an alternative medicine clinic, instead of showing studies, they'll say that Karen or Bob says that X treatment works, therefore it works. And the problem with that is that it's very enticing for us because, we're all likely to believe anecdotes. That's sort of how our brains developed. It's a shortcut. But the problem with anecdotal evidence is all students of science know, is that it really confers really low quality of evidence. We can't tell the cause of something. Just because someone says a treatment works doesn't mean it actually works. We need higher, more sophisticated kinds of science to determine that, such as randomized controlled trials. And what anecdotal evidence does is it plays on a fallacy that we're all susceptible for. It's a mouthful. It's called the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy, which just basically means because something happened first and then an event happened after, that the first event caused the latter event. And that's just not true. Just because we shower every morning and then the sun rises doesn't mean that our shower causes the sun to rise. But that's how our brains kind of perceive some of this stuff. So that's one red flag, is this elevation of anecdotal evidence. Another one I would say is being aware of what's called sciencey sounding language. A colleague of mine, Timothy Caulfield, who's a professor, he called it science ploitation, which is kind of exploitation using sciencey sounding language. So if you go to, say, an Instagram page or, again, an alternative medicine clinic website, and you see this sciencey sounding language, so things like, we are in the midst of a high frequency blossoming of interconnectedness that will give us access to the quantum soup itself. What I just said is complete nonsense. It sounds sciencey. I used a bunch of sciencey sounding words like quantum and high frequency, but together they mean nothing. And grifters will actually do that to dupe people, to make it sound like they're selling something that's actually legitimate. The fact is that when you hear the word quantum, for instance, attached to any kind of therapy, you can be near certain that therapy is a scam, because quantum physics is just such a deeply counterintuitive, highly complex area of physics, that obscurity of which lends itself perfectly into the hands of grifters, who can then sell their pseudoscientific wares through this haze of sciencey sounding language. So that's another kind of red flag. The last one I mentioned briefly is the one that I think is probably the most important, which with respect to separating the wheat from the chaff. And that is what we would call when claims are divorced from the broader scientific literature. So what I mean by that is that there are people, alternative medicine grifters or pseudoscience promoters, that will make claims, scientific claims, and what they're claiming is completely disconnected from hard-earned centuries of biological and medical knowledge. So for example, with the treatment of homeopathy cannot work, because if it did work, it would literally violate the laws of pharmacology and the laws of physics that we know of. And the reason for that is what homeopathy does is it'll take an active ingredient, say a medicine, and it asks us to dilute it to the point that not a single molecule is actually left in the solution that we have. So the homeopathy products that you see in, say, Shoppers Drug Mart or the pharmacies that you go to actually doesn't have any active ingredients in it at all. They're essentially, it's water or it's sugar pills or it's just kind of alcohol cut with contaminants. So that's not what homeopaths market, though. They say that that there's medicine in it, and there isn't. And they say that the more that you dilute a substance, the more effective it actually is. That just doesn't make sense according to the principles of pharmacology. So those are 3 red flags.
Jonathan, let's conclude with our final question. The book's last section is titled Solutions, and it highlights the concepts that inform true evidence-based healthcare. Help us understand what we should be looking for when we want to reclaim our mind and truly get better.
To be honest, I found that chapter the hardest to write. And the reason for that is because it really varies depending on someone's location and where they are. I mean, I wrote the book to be accessed for a global audience. But it really depends on the institutions and the healthcare systems that are kind of set up for people. So to kind of take a step back, I would suggest that at the minimum, we seek healthcare providers that are bona fide and that actually have licenses. So for example, real mental health professionals, that can be psychologists, that can be psychiatrists, that can be social workers, that can be psychiatric nurses. What it isn't are people who have non-legally protected titles who don't have any licenses. So your wellness coach or your wellness consultant or your psychotherapist in a jurisdiction where that isn't regulated. And the reason that stuff is so important is because when someone has a license, like a licensed psychologist or a licensed psychiatrist or social worker, then those licensed practitioners have training, they have credentials, they have qualifications, and more than that, they have a code of ethics and what's called legal standards of practice, which means they're obligated to practice evidence-based care. They're technically not allowed to practice pseudoscientific treatments or treatments that can harm the public. That's the whole point of a regulatory body, and that's why we have licenses. It's to help protect the public. When we have in the wild west of the wellness industry, when you don't have any licenses, it's a free-for-all, and it's very much caveat emptor, which is buyer beware. So that's one thing that I would encourage people to obviously do, is to seek out actually bona fide health professionals. And I guess it's more than that as well, because what I really tried to make clear in the book was to try to help people to understand not only what to seek, but also what to avoid. And there are particular, buzzwords, red flags that we have to look for. Buzzwords like quantum, buzzwords like holistic or natural or toxins or detox. If you see these things from a health practitioner, that's not what mainstream modern medicine healthcare professionals talk about. It's really buying into that alternative medicine ideology again. And you can probably bet that the people who are using those buzzwords are selling treatments that, again, have likely not been appropriately tested for safety and effectiveness. And it gets even more than that. So, alternative medicine has also gone through various name changes over time. And so I want people to be wary of those name changes. So for example, it's not just alternative medicine, but the term integrative medicine has been used in the 1990s. Same with the term functional medicine. For me, these are, again, red flags, because these aren't used by bona fide health professionals. Again, and it's really buying into that ideology that sows distrust in mainstream medicine. And when you go to spaces that advertise themselves as, say, functional medicine or integrative medicine, or have these kinds of buzzwords, I just think that these spaces you're not likely to find credible and unbiased information about mental health and mental illness.
We have about another minute here, Jonathan. What would you suggest that these bona fide healthcare professionals can do to combat, this flood of misinformation?
Well, in Canada, we have a code of ethics for psychologists, and the fourth order principle in our code of ethics is called responsibility to society. And I've interpreted that as meaning, in part, it means that we need to promote and practice evidence-based care and help protect the public against, again, misinformation and pseudoscience. And one way in which to do that is with science communication. I get at the same time that's not for everyone. Not everyone has to do science communication, because, to be frank, it can be quite a minefield in terms of trolling and harassment, and it can be a lot of stressful, and there's not a lot of incentive to do it right now. At the same time, I think it's super important as we move into this era of social media and AI, and where the world is really small in terms of being digitally connected. And I think that we do need a lot of voices out there, voices of real expertise from not just mental health, but all areas of health. And I think that if people can chip in any way in which they can, that would go a long way, because certainly it's an uphill battle as we see so much misinformation being peddled, not only by grifters themselves, but again, it's even becoming baked into our healthcare institutions. I won't get too much into it, but look no further than the current U.S. administration.
Jonathan, that has been our 5 questions about your book, and you've answered them in 5 minutes. Let's move on to our bonus questions. Jonathan, let us know a little bit more about your career trajectory to where you are now. How did you get to become a clinical psychologist?
Well, I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto. Didn't know what I was doing at that time, as many undergraduates can probably relate to. I was doing philosophy and psychology, and then I realized that psychology was a bit more applied, and I did want to help people due to reasons in my personal life and kind of growing up who were afflicted with addiction. And that got me to enter an addictions laboratory where I conducted addiction-related research for years. And then I realized that, and this can go in a variety of ways depending on people's own trajectories when they enter clinical psychology, which is my field. But I really took to clinical work even more than kind of research practice, because I found it really rewarding helping people to manage their addiction and mental health concerns. And for the past 10 years, I've been doing that full time, working in a really highly specialized clinic where we get to help folks who are suffering with addiction and mental health disorders.
You mentioned in your bio that you are teaching at my alma mater, the University of Calgary. I imagine that's a rewarding experience for you.
It's super rewarding. Yeah, I don't teach classes traditionally or per se, but what I have been doing for the 10 years is supervising clinically students from the University of Calgary's clinical psychology program and residents who are completing their final year of PhD. So they come to our clinic and they essentially shadow us for a while, and then we teach them how to do psychotherapy and group therapy and individual therapy in that context. And I do get to sit on several master's committees and dissertation committees as well, and get to witness the students doing the cutting edge research and really being at the forefront of science. And it is extremely rewarding, and I enjoy it a lot.
Last question for you here. Obviously, the book is a major achievement, but can you tell us about another accomplishment that you're proud of?
Another accomplishment, I would say this is a bit of a twist on the question, but one of the major accomplishments I would say is more of a personal one. I really achieved work-life balance, which is something that we teach our patients, we teach our students to do. I wasn't good at it in graduate school, to be honest. We're busting our butts 24/7, working all of the time. And I made the decision once I started work to never do that again, and to really just kind of confine ourselves to an appropriate, flexible schedule that we find manageable, and to really build in hobbies and leisure time and meaningful pursuits that actually increase our quality of life, because we need balance in those areas. We need productivity, but we also need self-care and leisure. And I do consider that an accomplishment, because for a lot of people, all of us, it can be a moving target. And I think once people nail that down, life gets better.
Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us on Books in 5. Again, the title of the book is Mind the Science. I will put a link to the book in the show notes. Definitely go and read it, buy it. If you're not able to buy it, check it out from your local library, because it is such an important topic. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
That means a lot. Thank you so much for having me.
The host of Books in 5 is Bhavan Sodhan. Books in 5 is produced in collaboration with Podfather Creative in Vancouver, Canada.